Our final topic of this unit is topic 7, multiplying polynomials. So up until now, we know how to use the FOIL method to multiply two binomials together, but now we're going to be looking at multiplying bigger polynomials together. Now, multiplying polynomials together isn't difficult, but it does take some organization so we don't do the same step twice. So how we organize it is we look at the first set of brackets here, and then we start with the first term in the first set of brackets. So that would be 2h. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply this 2h to every term in the second set of brackets. So we're going to start with this. Our first step here would be 2h times h squared. 2h times h squared, which is equal to 2h to the power of 3. Now we're going to do this 2h times the next term in the brackets. So 2h times 3h, which is equal to 6h squared. And then we'll do this 2h times that negative 4 there. So 2h times negative 4 is equal to negative 8h. Now that we're done working with the first term here and multiplying it to everything in that next set of brackets, we're going to move on to the second term in the first set of brackets, and we're going to do the same thing with it. We're going to multiply it to everything in the second set of brackets. So starting off, we're going to do 5 times h squared. So 5 times h squared gives us 5h squared. Then we're going to do 5 times 3h. 5 times 3h, which is equal to 15h. And finally, we're going to do 5 times negative 4, which is equal to negative 20. So now we multiplied everything together and we didn't miss one, and we also didn't overlap any and do it twice. So now we're going to take all of these and write it as a polynomial. So that is going to equal 2h to the power of 3 plus 6h squared minus 8h plus 5h squared plus 15h minus 20. So we expanded these two polynomials that are multiplying together, and now our next step is to simplify. So let's look for some like terms here. Are there any like terms with 2h to the power of 3? No, there isn't. There's no other terms with h to the power of 3, so I'm going to cross that out and I'm going to write 2h to the power of 3 here. Now let's look to see if there's any terms with h squared in it. Well, we have 6h squared here, plus another 5h squared gives us 11h squared, so plus 11h squared. Now let's look at the terms with just an h in it. We have negative 8h plus 15h. So that leaves us with plus 7h, and I'm going to cross those two out so we don't forget that we dealt with them. And then finally, we have this negative 20 on the end that has no other like terms with it. And now we're done. We expanded and we simplified those polynomials that we're multiplying together. So let's try the next one here. It's the same thing, except now we have a trinomial times a trinomial. So we're going to start off with the first term in the first set of brackets, and we're going to multiply it to everything in the second set of brackets. So the first thing we're going to do is negative 3f squared times 4f squared. So negative 3 times 4 gives us negative 12, and f squared times f squared is f to the power of 4. So that's our step number 1. Now we're going to do negative 3f squared times negative f. So negative 3 times this invisible negative 1 here gives us positive 3, and f squared times f gives us f to the power of 3. Next, we're going to do this negative 3f squared times negative 6. So we're going to get positive 18, because negative 3 times negative 6 gives us positive 18, and then f squared. Now let's move on to the next term in the first set of brackets. So we're going to start with 3f, and we're going to multiply it to the first term in the second pair of brackets. So we have plus 3 times 4. That leaves us with plus 12. And then f times f squared is f to the power of 3. Next, we're going to do this term times the second one in the second set of brackets. So we have 3f times negative 1. That would be negative 3. And f times f is f squared. And finally, we're going to take this one and multiply it to the last term there. So we have 3f times negative 6, which is negative 18, and then the f needs to go there as well. And I just put these numbers here in circles to help you see what's going on, but you don't have to put those down on your worksheets or tests. And the final one we're going to do is this negative 2. So we're going to do negative 2 times 4f squared. So that's going to give us negative 8f squared. Then we have negative 2 times negative f. That would be positive 2f. And finally, we're going to do negative 2 times negative 6, which is positive 12. So now we fully expanded these polynomials, we multiplied them, and now we need to simplify them. So let's look for some like terms. So let's start off with these f to the power of 4s. Are there any other f to the power of 4s? No, there isn't. So we just have negative 12 f to the power of 4 here, and I'm going to cross that out so we know we dealt with it. Now let's look at f to the power of 3. Well, we have this one, we have this one, and that's it. So 3 plus 12 would leave us with plus 15 f to the power of 3. And now I'm going to cross these two out. Now let's deal with the f squares. We have 18 here, minus 3, minus 8. So 18 minus 3, that leaves us with 15. And then if we subtract another 8 from that, that leaves us with 7. So we have plus 7 f squared. And I'm going to cross out all these f squares now. And let's look at the regular f terms. We have negative 18 plus 2, so that would leave us with negative 16f. Cross those two out. And finally, that plus 12 on the end is all alone and there's nothing to combine it with. So our final answer is negative 12 f to the power 4 plus 15 f cubed plus 7f squared minus 16f plus 12. Let's try some different variations of these questions now. We've seen some like this already, where it has the little squared there when we're factoring, especially when it comes to perfect square trinomials. So if we were to expand and simplify this, the first thing I'm going to do is write 2r plus 5t times 2r plus 5t. So instead of writing squared, I just wrote it in this expanded form here, because now it's just as easy as foiling it, since both of these are binomials. So the first term's 2r times 2r, that's 4r squared. Then we have the outside terms, 2r times 5t, that would be 10rt. Then the inside would be 5t times 2r, that would be plus 10rt again. And finally, the last terms, we have 5t times 5t, which is plus 25t squared. And now we can simplify it by combining like terms. These two terms in the middle are like terms. So we are going to have 4r squared plus 20rt plus 25t squared, and that is our final answer. So let's try another one here. Now we have two variables going on in this one. We have x's and we have y's. But the same steps apply. So we're going to start with that first term in the first set of brackets, and we're going to multiply it to everything in the second set of brackets. So here I'm just going to label these 1, 2, 3. And let's see what we get. So let's start with the number 1 there. We have 3x times 4x. That gives us 12x squared. Then we have 3x times negative 3y. So we would have negative 9xy. And then finally, we have 3x times 5. That would be plus 15x. Now let's move on to the second term in the first set of brackets, and we're going to multiply it to everything in the second set of brackets. So negative 2y times 4x, that would be negative 8xy. Negative 2y times negative 3y, well, negative times a negative gives us positive, so negative 2 times negative 3 would be positive 6y squared. And then negative 2y times 5 would be negative 10y. And let's see if we have any like terms that we can add together here. Let's start off with the x squareds. Are there any other x squared terms? I don't see any. So let's cross that out and write it down here, 12x squared. Now let's move on to the xy terms. We have negative 9xy minus another 8xy. So that would give us negative 17xy. And I'm going to cross those two out. Now here we have 15x. I don't see any other x's there, so we're just going to cross that out and write plus 15x here. And then there's no other term with a y squared, so we're going to do plus 6y squared, and finally negative 10y, because both of those don't have any like terms. And here is our final answer. Now these last examples is a bunch of the same thing, except we're adding a little bit of BEDMAS to it. So this goes back to the polynomials unit you did in grade 9, but it also adds in everything we just learned in this entire unit. So these questions here take a lot of organization, and it's really easy to mess up one little thing like a plus or a minus sign, and then it'll throw off your final answer. But I'll go through a couple here so you can see how we would go about it. So expand and simplify. So if we're following BEDMAS, we're going to do all the multiplication first before addition. So remember, if two brackets are next to each other like this, there is multiplication going on in between them. So what we need to do is we need to start with multiplying these brackets first and multiplying these brackets before we even think about that plus sign in the middle here. So let's start off multiplying the blue underlined brackets. Well, those are two binomials, so we can just follow FOIL there. So let's start with the first terms. We have 2c times c. That would be 2c squared. Next, we have the outside 2c times 5 would be plus 10c. Next, we have the inside negative 3 times c, which is negative 3c. And finally, the last negative 3 times 5, which would be negative 15. So now we completed everything that's underlined in blue there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that plus sign in the middle. Okay, so this one here, we're not touching that yet. And now let's deal with everything in the red. So now we have two binomials multiplying, but we also have that number out front, that 3. So we've seen questions like this before as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to FOIL those two binomials. So I'm going to put the 3 here, and then inside brackets next to it is where I'm going to put my answer to my foiling of those two binomials. Because remember, this 3 is multiplying everything here. So we need to make sure that it multiplies that entire FOILed polynomial that we get. So now let's FOIL these two polynomials here. So c times negative 3c, that is negative 3c squared. Then we would have c times 1, which is plus 1c, or just plus c. Then the inside would be negative 3 times negative 3c, that would be plus 9c. And finally, the last term is negative 3 times 1, which would be negative 3. Now, we still have to follow BEDMAS here, so our next step is going to be multiplication. We still have multiplication going on right here. So let's do some BEDMAS and multiply that. So I'm going to keep everything I have in blue the same because that's not being multiplied by anything. So I have 2c squared plus 10c minus 3c minus 15. And we have that plus sign in the middle that we haven't touched. And now let's multiply this 3 in using distributive property. So it's going to multiply all the terms in the bracket next to it. So 3 times negative 3c squared would be negative 9c squared. Then we have 3 times c, that would be plus 3c. 3 times 9c would be plus 27c. And finally, 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. So now this is when we have to think back to the polynomials unit you did in grade 9. If we are adding two polynomials together, so imagine there's brackets around these blue ones here, all the terms in the second set of brackets stay the same. So at this point, it just comes down to combining like terms. So let's do that. Let's start by looking at the c squareds. We have 2c squared minus 9c squared. So that would leave us with negative 7c squared. And I'm going to cross those two out. Then we have 10c minus 3c, that leaves us with 7c, plus another 3c, that's 10c again, plus 27c. So that would be 10c plus 27c is plus 37c. And I'm going to cross out all those c's. And finally, we have negative 15 minus 9. That leaves us with negative 24. And this is in descending order, so everything is good, and that's our final answer. Here's one more example. Now this final one here has a lot of steps to it, and if you can do this one, you are doing absolutely fantastic. If this one gets a little tricky for you, that's okay. There's a lot of steps, and it's really easy to make one little mistake. So whenever I see an exponent, I like to write that out as multiplication. So I'm going to write this part over here out as 3x plus 2y times 3x plus 2y. So at the start here, I have all this multiplication going on with these two polynomials. Then we have this minus sign in the middle that we're going to ignore until we're done all of the multiplication. So let's start out with multiplying everything in the blue here. So we start with the first term in the first set of brackets and we multiply it to both things in the next set of brackets. So we are going to have 3x times 2x, that is 6x squared. Then we have 3x times negative 4, which would be negative 12x. Next, we're going to move on to that y there. Y times 2x, that would be plus 2xy. And then y times negative 4, which would be negative 4y. And finally, we're going to do negative 1 times 2x, which would be negative 2x. And then negative 1 times negative 4, which is positive 4. All right, so we multiplied everything in those blue sets of brackets there. So this is all that stuff in blue, dark blue. Now I'm going to put that negative sign in the middle because we haven't dealt with that yet. And now let's multiply everything in the red there. So I'm going to write everything I multiply in the red in brackets. So let's FOIL this. It's two binomials. So we have first would be 3x times 3x, which is 9x squared. Then the outside would be 3x times 2y, which is plus 6xy. Then we have the inside 2y times 3x is again plus 6xy. And then the last terms are 2y times 2y, which is plus 4y squared. So now this is where we have to think back to grade 9 math once again. What happens when you have a negative sign that's attached to a set of brackets that has a polynomial in it? Well, it's going to reverse the sign of every single term in the brackets next to it. So let's rewrite this out here. So everything in this dark blue bunch is going to stay the same. So I'm just going to rewrite it down here. We have 6x squared minus 12x plus 2xy minus 4y minus 2x plus 4. And now we're going to rewrite everything in the red brackets, except we're going to reverse the sign. So instead of 9x squared, we have negative 9x squared. Then we have negative 6xy, negative 6xy again, and then negative 4y squared. So now this negative sign has been applied to everything inside the bracket, so we don't have to write it anymore. So now in our final step, all we have to do is combine like terms. So let's start off with the x squareds. We have 6x squared here minus 9x squared here, which leaves us with negative 3x squared. Next, let's look at the x's. We have negative 12x minus another 2x, and that's it. So that would be negative 14x. Cross those two out. Let's look at the xy's now. We have 2 here, minus 6 minus another 6. So plus 2 minus 6, that leaves us with minus 4xy, and then we're going to subtract another 6 from that, so that would be negative 10xy. Now let's look at the terms with just a y in it. We have negative 4y here, and I don't see any other terms with y's only, so I'm going to put negative 4y, and we're going to cross that off. Then we have plus 4 here, so I'm going to put plus 4. And finally, negative 4y squared at the end there. And I'm going to put a box around this. This is our final answer.